Why has St. Louis been hemorrhaging population for over 60 years? That is a question I'm sure many of St. Louis's past mayors have pondered as they doze off after a long day of underserving the people of St. Louis. The Gateway City has about 30 solid reasons for the plunging population they've experienced since the late 1940s. Today, we're looking at 10 of the biggest reasons. Just to give you an idea of how much their population has dropped, in 1950 at the census, their population was 856,796 people. Now that's the city itself, not the whole metro area. In 2020, their population was 301,578 people. And in 2021, they dropped down to 293,000. It's going to continue. Those numbers make St. Louis one of the fastest shrinking cities in the United States. The city's population has declined by an average of 1.2% per year since 1950. We are going to find out why. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, white flight. After World War II in the 1950s and 60s, many white residents of St. Louis moved to the suburbs, leaving the city with a shrinking tax base and a growing population of poor and minority residents. This happened in a lot of major cities after World War II. Prior to World War II, there really wasn't suburbs. We didn't have them. They were small towns outside of major cities sometimes. Suburbs and tract homes started popping up, and this became very attractive to working white families. This was due to a number of factors, including the desegregation of schools, the rise of the civil rights movement, and the perception that the city was becoming less safe. In a lot of cases, the cities were becoming less safe. Crime rates rose as jobs after World War II sort of faded away. This in part had to do with a lot of the failure of major cities in the Midwest. That's where a lot of the manufacturing was going on for World War II and the 1950s. That's why their last decade that they grew was actually the 1940s, which showed up at the 1950 census. Number 9, the declining of manufacturing. St. Louis was once a major center for manufacturing, but many of these jobs have been lost to automation and outsourcing, and like I'd said, the end of World War II. That's when it began. This has led to the decline in the city's economy and the decrease in the number of people that were able to find good paying jobs inside the city. Back in the day, we had tons of warehouses and manufacturing plants in major cities. Warehouses, all that good stuff. We still have those, just not on the scale that we had many years ago. A lot of the factories and a lot of manufacturing were outsourced or they moved out towards the suburbs too. The city I grew up in, Torrance, California, that's a perfect example. During World War II and afterwards, all the aerospace companies moved out to the suburbs like El Segundo, Hawthorne, Gardena, Long Beach, and all the workers lived in places like Torrance, California, Redondo Beach, Lomita, Lawndale, El Segundo, that type of thing. That's what happened in Los Angeles. This happened to many cities. St. Louis is just another one of them. A lot of the cities, though, switched to other industries. St. Louis has, just not as good as they probably should have. Number 8, the crime. Yeah, St. Louis has a long history of crime. It has contributed to the city's population decline in a big way. I mean, in recent years, it's gotten better, but St. Louis has a long history of violent crime and just crime in general. I watched a news thing about the crime in St. Louis years ago. It was like on 60 Minutes or something like that. They were talking to a guy who was wheelchair bound. He said he fell asleep at the bus stop waiting for the bus because the buses were always late. He woke up, someone stole his prosthetic leg and his false teeth. He'd taken his false teeth out of his mouth while he was kind of resting. I don't know why, but he put them on his leg while he was dozed off. Someone took his prosthetic leg and his false teeth. You gotta be a low-down criminal to steal a man's false teeth. Number 7, bad schools. Yeah, St. Louis has a history of having some bad schools. Matter of fact, Area Vibes right now gives them an F, but that's just right now. They've got a history of this, like I'd said. One thing St. Louis does do is they have a good student-to-teacher ratio. The national average is 16 students to 1 teacher. St. Louis is 14 to 1, so that's good. The lower the better. The sad thing is their test scores are 50% lower than the national average, and their high school diplomas are 6% lower than the national national average, meaning the amount of kids that actually get their high school diploma. They do have one other strange stat. Their bachelor degrees, they're actually 9% higher than the national average, as in the amount of residents that have bachelor's degrees. The schools aren't as dangerous as they once were. The 70s and 80s, apparently, it was really, really bad. That's gotten a lot better, and they're a lot safer. Just they're not where they need to be, I imagine. I mean, obviously, a school should be the safest place your kid can go. That's just not the reality of modern day America. It's pretty sad when it's safer for you to go in the army than actually go to school. And that's how it is in a lot of schools in the United States these days. Number 6, lack of investment. Yes, this is a thing that's becoming more and more of an issue in cities. It always has been to a degree, but it's getting worse. Like so many other Rust Belt cities, even though some people don't consider St. Louis a Rust Belt city, it was definitely what they used to call a factory belt city back in the day when they had major manufacturing going on in this part of the country. And I have to say this, they still have manufacturing, just not what it used to be. If I don't say that, I'm going to get 20 people. I work at a plant near St. Louis. What are you talking about? The lack of investment has a lot to do with the lack of tax dollars. They have a low tax base, like we talked about earlier. That means less money to go into city projects. Part of that is the poor transportation system. St. Louis public transportation system is outdated, inefficient, and it makes it difficult for people to get around the city. The system is not well connected, it's not reliable, and it's dirty. People report finding things on the floor like drug paraphernalia, handcuffs, false teeth, old clothes. While researching this, I did hear it's been getting a little cleaner in the last few years, handful of years, I should say. They've made some improvements, but over time, it just wasn't there. It wasn't a nice thing to be involved in, public transit in St. Louis. Now, hopefully with the infrastructure deal, this is another thing I learned, with the infrastructure deal that the federal government passed last year, they're getting some money to help things like their public transit. Number 5, lack of tourism and amenities. St. Louis is a major city. It's one of the most known cities in the U.S., but they just don't pull in the tourism dollars like many other major cities. They don't have a lot to offer. They got the St. Louis Zoo, you can go see a Cardinals game, and they have the St. Louis Ark on the Mississippi River. Those are all great things to see. The Ark might be kind of hard to see because it's actually the Arch. Who was leaving the comment? I know it's the St. Louis Arch, not the St. Louis Ark. I made that joke years ago on a video about St. Louis. I had a guy tell me I was un-American because I didn't know the difference. Anyway, the St. Louis Arch is actually called the Gateway Arch, and it is in the Gateway Arch National Park, right there on the Mississippi River in St. Louis. And it's really cool, but it's not enough to bring people in like they should. When you look at the top 100 cities in the United States, St. Louis is ranked 34th for tourism. And when it's foreign tourism, they're ranked 57th. They barely beat Des Moines. Number 4, high cost of living. This one just blows me away. St. Louis is not a great place to live, but they still got a high cost of living. When somebody doesn't want to live someplace or somebody doesn't want something, it should be cheaper. That's how the world works. Living in St. Louis is like paying top dollar for a short sleeve business suit you bought at 7-Eleven. It's something you don't want, but you still gotta pay top dollar for it. But now, is it high compared to Beverly Hills, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco? No, it's not that high. But the cost of living in St. Louis is relatively high, especially for a city with its economic problems. The cost of housing, food, and transportation are all higher than most of the other economically challenged cities in the Midwest. Number 3, a lack of job opportunities. Yeah, they don't really have a lot of jobs going on in St. Louis compared to other major cities. They've been struggling with this for years, and that's one of the main reasons people have been leaving. This is just human nature. Think back to when we used to follow the herds or we used to hunt and gather. When you couldn't survive in an area, you moved someplace else. We're still the same creatures as we've always been. It's just what we need to survive has changed. St. Louis has a relatively low unemployment rate, but many of the jobs that are available are low-paying jobs and don't offer many benefits. The city's economy is struggling and there's not enough high-paying jobs to attract new residents or businesses. Number 2, it's got a bad reputation. Part of St. Louis's biggest problem is its reputation. To put it plainly, St. Louis has a poor image, both nationally and internationally, and this has made it difficult to attract new residents and businesses. The city is often associated with crime and poverty, and this has made it a less than desirable place to live. I read about Pruitt-Igoe, which was a housing project that was up from 1954 to 1972, and it became infamous for its poverty, crime, and segregation, but it was demolished in 1972. So 40 years later, that's still an image a lot of people have in their head about St. Louis. If you ever want to watch something interesting, there's a lot of videos about Pruitt-Igoe. I've watched a few of them. That place was a total nightmare. Originally, the plans for it were supposed to be a lot different, and it probably would have been a really nice place. But politicians and people in charge of the budget started cutting back on all the things that would have made it nice, and basically turned it into a prison without walls. That's what it kind of looked like, an old prison. But that is one of the biggest challenges St. Louis has always faced, is their image. I mean, there's other cities that face the same image. Detroit, Chicago, they have horrible reputations, and it really helps bring down the city or stop it from moving forward. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There is a link for that down below. Please go over and subscribe. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, recent challenges. Now, we've talked about all the different things that have affected St. Louis and stopped it from growing and forced it to lose population for more than 60 years. Well, some things have happened in recent years that have kind of put another nail in the St. Louis coffin, so to speak. The first one was the opioid epidemic. St. Louis was hit hard by this, and it contributed to the city's population decline. The city has one of the highest rates of opioid addiction in the country, and this has led to an increase in crime and homelessness. And the second one is the COVID-19 pandemic. This hit every city in the United States, and it hit St. Louis pretty hard too, and it negatively affected the population. Now, if the city was in good shape and people wanted to live there, if they left because of the pandemic, they would have come back. But if it's a place that's not worth coming back to, they usually stay where they went to. And that really happened a lot in St. Louis. A lot of jobs closed down, so people moved in with relatives in other states, and they just never came back to St. Louis. The pandemic has led to job losses and business closures, and it made it more and more difficult for people to stay in the city. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, and be nice to each other.